Today's webinar is entitled Information Please, Find Incredible Information on the Web for Free, and our presenter is Linette Koren. Linette Koren is RIT's engineering librarian, a position she has held for over 12 years. She recently returned to this position after 1 year as library director at RIT Dubai. Linette loves to search the internet to find information and solve information-related puzzles that help faculty and students conduct their research. She works closely with graduate students as Graduate Services Coordinator to ensure that students know about all the resources available to them as they begin to research and write their theses and dissertations. Linette uses all the random trivia in her head, gained from years of librarianship, to enter trivia contests and win prizes. When not at work, she works diligently at her hobby of entering and winning sweepstakes. During RIT's intersession, Linette went on an all-expenses-paid ski trip to Vail, Colorado, and has toured Switzerland for free and has won a Harley Davidson motorcycle. Her wins are not limited to the U.S. She has also won sweepstakes while in Dubai. Welcome, Linette.
Thanks for that introduction, Terry. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today. Let's get started. At the library, we regularly get questions from alums wanting to know what their access is to information once they've left RIT. As point 1 illustrates, we will explain what that is and how to get it. Beyond that, I want to talk to you a little bit about locating information on your own. The type of information we're concentrating on today is the same scholarly information you had access to when you were a student here at RIT via our databases, or if it was longer ago, our print abstracts and indexes. There are definitely things we all need to do in order to make sure that we are relying on solid, credible information. I've also asked my colleagues in the library to identify a few great sites that they rely on. I'll be showing you a few of those as a means of giving you a representative sampling of free information in a few of the disciplines we serve at RIT. Finally, I'll give you some tips as to how to acquire information you locate that may or may not be free. There are always ways for you to use tools that lead you to information that may not be free, and that's okay. Often the most important part of researching is identifying the critical information. Access can usually be obtained by one means or another, if not just flat out paid for if you're no longer affiliated with an academic institution. The first resources I'm going to direct you to are very generously provided to you through the financial support of the Office of Alumni Relations. A big shout out to them for recognizing the importance of providing these databases to you. To access these resources, head to the Alumni Relations homepage and choose Benefits and then Educational. The information about these databases is near the bottom of the Educational Benefits page. My apologies here just quickly. The new Alumni Relations website debuted after my slides were created. So this slide depicts the previous method of access. The new path is even easier to follow, so don't worry about it when you get to the Alumni Network page. You will need to log in through the Alumni Network to access these databases. Be sure to create your RIT computer account by going to start.rit.edu or go there to reactivate your account. The directions are explicitly laid out for you on that page. Let's move on to the next slide that takes us to a guide we created in the library to hopefully better explain alumni access to these databases and other library resources. So this is the guide that we've created to help alums understand what their access to resources is. I've given you the URL to this guide on the slide in that upper right-hand corner, You might want to bookmark it for future reference. If you are in the local area, feel free to use our physical facility. All that's needed to check out print materials is an RIT Alumni ID, which you can get at the registrar's office. If you do visit, you'll be pleasantly surprised that the first floor of the library was renovated over the summer and looks great. We are hopeful for continued funding to renovate the rest of the building. If you are in town and come in, you may borrow print materials, mainly books, for 3 weeks or 21 days. This page also details the contents of the databases for you, which come from a vendor called ProQuest. The ABI Informed Complete database will provide you with lots of business information, such as conditions and trends and industry news. The newspaper database will cover many of the major national newspapers, such as the New York Times, USA Today, and the Washington Post. The Research Library database covers over 4,000 titles, both scholarly as well as trade publications. These should be regular go-to databases for you now that you know about them. I encourage you to get your Alumni Network login activated and start searching them today. Now, if you are on campus and want to use any of the current databases that we subscribe to that are not available remotely, stop by the circulation desk for what we call a guest account. This account will give you access to databases that allow for on-site walk-in use. Be mindful that not all our databases allow this, and we are bound by licenses and user agreements we've signed. So we've covered accessing what Alumni Relations provides for you and what you can borrow and use on campus. Now let's move on to what you're searching for on your own. When you walk into a library, and when you were here at RIT, you might not have realized this, but you were relying on the librarians to select credible, current, curriculum-based, non-biased content for you to use in the form of books, journals, newspapers, basically anything that was in the building. Given that everyone is a publisher these days on the internet, you need to use the same skills that librarians have mastered to select information for yourself. You want to know who's writing this stuff, what are their qualifications, is the content directed at you, are you the intended audience, is the information accurate and verifiable, does it present just one side of an argument, or is it biased in some way? Is the information current? Old information often becomes inaccurate merely due to its age. When was the website last updated? All these criteria are further spelled out on the guide listed here. The guide is titled Evaluating Information on the Internet. I do suggest you take a look at it in a little more detail and test these criteria out on a few sites that you frequent and incorporate it into all of your searching. Later on, I will discuss some options of using local facilities that get you where you're looking for, hopefully for free. The biggest challenge is identifying what you need. What will answer your question? These days in library jargon, that's called discovery. Once you identify what you need that will answer your question, that's more than half the battle. Acquiring it or accessing it is usually a much smaller part of your process. I'll give you some tips on how to facilitate both the discovery and the acquisition. Not knowing the composition of the viewing audience, I asked my colleagues who support all colleges here at RIT what free resources they would suggest showing to a diverse gathering of alumni. This list is certainly not comprehensive. It's meant to be representative of all the different types of sites you might find for yourself as the more experienced researcher and searcher you'll be when we're done this afternoon. The Public Library of Science, which is what PLOS stands for, makes their literature freely available. The publishing model is quite different. The authors and or their institutions pay to publish, and then access is free for users. So if you're looking for credible current science and medical literature, I would start here. This is merely a screenshot to their website to give you some idea that you're on the correct site. So in preparing the webinar, I performed a search on alternative energy and identified a recent article from November 27th entitled, "Comparing the Ecological Impacts of Wind and Oil and Gas Development, a Landscape Scale Assessment." This article was written by a faculty member at Colorado State. The article, the researcher, and the institution can all be verified with a few quick searches. This would certainly pass the majority of the evaluation tests we just discussed. One thing to notice is that this is a .org site. That can be helpful in determining credibility, as we discussed earlier. That's certainly not to say that all .orgs are going to be credible, but it's certainly something to look for. Also get into the habit of reading the About page on a site you aren't familiar with. It can be enlightening. Also be wary of a site without an About page. In this case, it is at the very bottom of the screen, which is not visible here. So in terms of looking for it, it can often be at the very top of the screen or at the very bottom. The National Academies Press has a wealth of credible information, including over 4,000 books and reports. Admittedly, it leans towards science, medicine, and engineering. Even though they don't grant degrees, they have a .edu domain. Now, when thinking about this, I think it was a situation where they were grandfathered in for this domain from the early days of the Internet. So here's a screenshot of what the National Academies Press website looks like. The Browse Topics down the left-hand side of the page lists all the subjects covered. The search box, you'll notice, is up in the upper right-hand corner of the page. I performed a search on cybersecurity. One of my results was entitled, "Professionalizing the Nation's Cybersecurity Workforce, Criteria for Future Decision-Making." It was published in 2013 by the National Research Council. The other great thing about this site is that it tells you how many downloads of any particular item have occurred. This helps you make further value judgments of the work based on those numbers, how popular it is or how credible it is. It's information buried here in resources like this that just might help out with a business decision you or a team has to make, or a report you need to write, or choosing a direction, or getting some focus or another perspective on an issue you're dealing with. Consider adding tools like this to your work research. Your searching is not only for your personal use. Now, JSTOR is a digital library of academic journals, books, and other primary sources. About a year ago, they created the Register and Read program that allows scholars and researchers to read up to 3 articles for free approximately every 2 weeks. About 1,200 of the 2,000 journals that they contain are available to the Register and Read program participants. Unfortunately, content does not come from current journal issues, but rather from older issues. You do need to register for an account, and notice that they are a .org domain. The Business Librarian suggested this next site and database for several reasons. First, because of the great content it makes available, but also to illustrate that this database is available to those of you in New York State via the Novel NY program. You simply need to enter your New York State driver's license number after selecting the Business Insights Essentials database from the Novel New York website. At the Novel New York website, you'll find more about what's available if you are in New York State, and we do know that we have many alums that are still in the state. Once again, note that this is a .org site. The New York State Library brings us other databases in addition to those in the New York Novel NY category. So, if you are a New York State resident, you will see from this screen a whole list of other databases offered. And I've given you the URL to this website, once again in the upper right-hand corner of the slide. If you scroll down the active page, the list is lengthy. Some are accessible to those with a New York State Library Resident Borrower's Card, which you can apply for and receive online. Now, certainly I understand that not all of you are residents of New York State. I show the screen also to illustrate that your state may also have similar access set up to similar resources. I would encourage you to investigate what access you might have. If you don't know where to start, I'd start with my local public library and talk to a librarian. So there's always more. There are more reputable sites that came recommended than we would have time to discuss. So I've listed out just a few more that you can explore on your own. These are all sites that colleagues recommended. Medline, if you don't know, is the database of the National Library of Medicine. It does have some full text content in it, but once again, it's a site where you can identify a lot of good information and then move to another step of finding the full text on your own. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has huge amounts of content available on their website, as does the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. If your interests are in the social sciences, you should investigate the Social Science Research Network, the SSRN. Our NCID librarian recommended several publications from Gallaudet, the Biography Index, the Periodical Index, and the Video Library. And our Computer Science IT librarian recommended the free Usenix Proceedings. The Directory of Open Access Journals, the DOAJ, is a site and a service that indexes and provides access to quality-controlled open access journals and their articles. Somewhat similar to the PLOS site that we discussed earlier. This site will help you identify if an open access journal exists on your topic. There are open access journals on just about every scholarly topic you can imagine. Currently, they are listing over 9,700 journals. You may also search for content within these journals at this website. There are even some commercial journal publishers now that are publishing open access journals. Once again, notice that it's a .org website. Now, I certainly didn't set out to show you mostly .org sites, but that should tell you something about where a lot of good, free, credible information comes from. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add a few government websites to searching for those of you that might be inventing or innovating or needing just great data. The full text of patents and patent applications are both searchable and available from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And there's a lot of great data freely available on the U.S. Census. Most people often don't know that there are two censuses. One is of people, and there's a great data available in an economic census. It happens about every 5 years. And obviously your .gov sites will be very credible as well. Well, I talked a little earlier about discovery being important first and foremost. A lot of the databases where you might not have full access to are still searchable to you in the form of Google and maybe even more so Google Scholar searches. For example, if you're an electrical engineer and wanted to know if an EE topic is covered in IEEE, that's your primary database, and while you were here at RIT you probably used it, you could search Google Scholar as it has indexed the IEEE database. Using Google Scholarly for your discovery portion, and then you figure out how to best access or obtain the full text. It might be available to you via public library, or it might be available to you using the public library's interlibrary loan services. It still might be available to you by visiting a public institution of higher education. They are often required to allow the general public to access information on site as your tax dollars have funded their existence. Think SUNY system in New York State. Or you just might decide to plunk down the $29.95 that the vendor is willing to sell you the article for. It's really up to you how desperately you want it and if you're willing to pay for it. The next slide is going to show you how to set up Google Scholar to identify libraries that may be able to assist depending on where you're located geographically. You can also search Summon, which is the library's new discovery tool. It searches many databases and the library catalog. The Summon search box is on the library homepage. Obviously, you won't be able to access full text, but once again, discovery is the most important part of the process. So this slide shows you a little bit about Google Scholar. When you're in Google Scholar, I do recommend that you set up your preferences by clicking on the settings link and then the library links. See it on the left-hand side of the screenshot in red. I'd advise you to type in your state or the name of a school locally where you are and just see what comes up. Click on them and then save them as your preferences. Then, the next time you do a Google Scholar search, you will know if those schools own what you're looking for because additional information will be displayed on your results screen. Now, sometimes it is difficult to locate the Scholar Preferences menus. If you can't easily locate them, just do a Google search for Google Scholar Preferences. I guarantee you it'll be the first result in your Google search. You may want to investigate what the usage policies are at the libraries near you. Never assume that you can just walk in and have access. Always ask. So that concludes what I've prepared for today's session. I know I've covered a great deal of information, and you'll need some time to process it all. But are there any questions about anything right now that I might be able to answer or to clarify for you?
Thank you very much, Linette, for sharing your expertise in sifting and winnowing through the vast information resources of the Internet. And now, we do have some questions for you from today's webinar participants. The first question is, you mentioned Google Scholar a few times. I've never heard of that. What is it?
Well, Google Scholar is pretty much Google's answer to separating out the searching of scholarly information from the day-to-day searching for your Olympics coverage to watching cat videos. It's basically limiting its searching to articles, books, theses from academic publishers, professional societies, and universities. It really separates out a lot of the junk that would come up in a regular Google search. And I encourage you all to take a search and perform it both in Google and Google Scholar to see the difference. Now, if you want to find out how you start off a Google Scholar search, generally in Google there's a More button at the top, and if you click on that, Google Scholar will be one of the options that you see in that More, and then it will take you to the site where it's limiting to just those types of items I described.
All right, thank you. We have another question. I'm embarrassed to admit I never use my public library. How do I begin?
Well, I'm not certain how a local library works where the questioner lives, but often, as does here in Monroe County, the process begins with obtaining a library card. Here, I know that you must present yourself in person, at least the first time, with documents that can kind of demonstrate your identity and your residence. So generally, that's a license and maybe a utility bill with the current address. They want to make sure that you're actually living in the geographic area served by your for that library system. And while you're there, I would ask questions about all that's available to you on-site and online. For example, here in Monroe County, our library system, we have a product available to us that's called Overdrive. And we can download and listen to audiobooks right from the library's website. It's a great service that I think is actually underutilized.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Are there any databases to find contact information for people at companies?
Certainly there are databases that do that. I don't know exactly what the credible and free ones are at this time, but certainly feel free to contact me directly, and I can talk to the business librarian who knows all of that kind of off the top of her head and can put you in touch with some of those databases.
Okay. Here's another question. With so much information available online, do you still think it's necessary to visit a library in person?
That's a great question. You know, so much of what I personally do is handled via chat. And you'll see that if you were on any of the guides that I showed you, all those guides have chat boxes on the right-hand side, so that what we're aiming to do is to deliver information to you at the point of need. So what I would recommend, that even if you're using a library remotely or electronically, that I think the best person to interact with and maintain a relationship with is that librarian. We're the ones who are going to know what was purchased, how to use it, how to provide access, how you can get to it on campus, off campus. Right now at RIT, we're big into creating these guides that help you, all these lib guides that I'm showing you, how to help you access all of these resources. So yes, start and maintain a relationship with a librarian who can, generally feed your information needs.
All right, these are great questions. Here's another question. That is, are there any databases or resources that can help gain competitive intelligence and insights from companies in my industry?
Once again, yes, there's plenty. There are plenty of databases that do this. Off the top of my head, like I said, or like was stated in the introduction, I'm the engineering librarian, not the business librarian. So I know that there are. I just certainly don't know what they are off the top of my head. So feel free to reach out to me, and I can get you those answers or put you in touch with the business librarian where you can continue that conversation.
All right. Another question: how much, if any, credibility should be lent to Wikipedia as a research tool?
That's another great question. And what I would say to that, and everyone you talk to has a different opinion upon Wikipedia. I generally don't mind it as a place to start if you have no focus or direction. Here in the library, we've created these guides and we've redeveloped our website so that we hope that even if you're not someone who asks questions or, likes to admit that you don't know something, or maybe you're just happen to be working at 2 a.m. on a Saturday and you don't have the luxury of having a librarian available for you to contact at that time, that there's some place to start. So in those kinds of situations, Wikipedia, is okay. But what we want, certainly at an educational institution, is for you then to make that leap once you've read a Wikipedia article to get into the references that article is directing you to, because that's the more credible, scholarly, verifiable research that then you should be depending on. The same thing goes when I go into classes and talk to students about Google as well as Google Scholar. And you notice I talked about Google Scholar quite heavily for all of you. I think both of those tools certainly have their place in the research process. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, that place is the beginning. And other times it might be the very end, but we want the bulk of your time to be spent in the more scholarly arena and area.
All right. Another question has come up. Are there grant research databases or ones for foundation funding?
Oh, there are many available. I'm sure that the federal government has many, and there are probably just as many databases as there are areas for grants. That would be a great search for you to run to identify some of those yourself. But I can guarantee that there are plenty out there.
Okay. Are there any other sites besides DOT.org and DOT.gov to trust?
Oh, certainly. There are other sites that are out there called .mils, which are military websites, and of course there are plenty of .edus. There are a lot of other .coms that are credible and trustworthy. It's just that you have more work to do, I think, on your own to verify which of the .coms are verifiable and trustworthy. And there are a lot of other sites in other countries too. We rely on, I work with graduate students a lot, so we rely on theses and dissertation databases that are in Canada and in Great Britain and in all of Europe. So there's a lot of good information all around the world.
All right. My question is in regard to accessing ProQuest database. Can it be accessed off-site after I have established an alumni account?
Yeah, great question. Yes, and that is the means and the method of using the ProQuest databases. They are meant to be used remotely from wherever you happen to be in the world with that alumni network account. So we do recommend that you create or update that account at start.rit.edu and take it from there. There are instructions there as to how alumni create the account, and I know that information is also available from the Office of Alumni Relations, that brand new website. I did see it there myself.
All right. Okay. And one more question that has popped up. Are there ways to access medical compendia used for insurance decisions that do not require special permissions? I have used the CU Medical Library and had to get several layers of permission to access even its most basic info.
Well, I will tell you that libraries are as organizations, we do like to share information. Right here in the Rochester area, we have a network of libraries that allow all of our individual patrons to borrow and use other facilities. And I will tell you that even here locally, the minor medical library at Strong is not part of that means and method of access. I think they believe maybe that they need to have all of their resources at hand for the staff there, the doctors and nurses. So they generally don't allow a lot of access to their materials, so that they're not potentially taken away or not on the shelves. Or and I think it also has to do with the publishers of that information and the kind of restrictions they place on that media and that information. So it might not be that it's the particular library that is wanting to deny that information to you. It might be because of a licensing agreement that you're not allowed to, or it requires so much special permission or hoops to jump through in order to get to it.
All right. These were all great questions. For those of you that have participated in this part of this great series. Additional questions can be emailed to ritalum@rit.edu or tweeted to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #RITWebinars. And we will direct your questions to Linette.